Aren't they wonderful? Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Shalom Eretov to our wonderful friends in Israel. Today's a difficult day, but an important day in Israel. The war effort in the north has progressed. Our hearts and prayers are with all of our friends in Israel. We're grateful you could join us for this most exciting and historic event. We are here today to celebrate the arrival in America of what we would consider one of humanity's most important artifacts, the Tel Dan Stele, or the House of David inscription. This priceless piece of ancient history has been to America only once, in 2014, when it was briefly exhibited at the prestigious Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So Armstrong Autdiotirum and the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology is honored and enormously grateful to display this item and to share it with the people of Oklahoma and beyond. King David is one of the most famous figures in world history and an iconic personality in the canon of Western civilization. Even today, 3,000 years later, David remains a household name. If the West created a Mount Rushmore of its greatest, most important figures, one could make a strong case that King David should be on there, perhaps beside Shakespeare and Churchill. David was the world's first Renaissance man. He was a warrior and king, a poet and musician, a shepherd and farmer, a husband and father. He was the patriarch of an enduring royal dynasty of kings, one that echoes even into modern times. The Bible tells us that David was unique and exceptional, a man after God's own heart. Yet David's life also epitomizes the human condition, one so familiar to us all. He was conflicted, flawed, incomplete. David's life and legacy has been an inspiration for thousands of years in Western art and culture, be it Michelangelo's famous sculpture, Caravaggio's masterful David and Goliath, or in the countless literary references of supreme authors like Shakespeare, Milton, and Dickens. In religion, David is central to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The name David is mentioned more than 1,000 times in the Bible. To Christians, he is perhaps the greatest biblical figure after Jesus Christ. And we know that Jesus himself was a descendant of King David. To our Jewish brothers, King David's legacy is deeply woven into the religious, cultural, and historical fabric of Judaism and Israel's identity. King David, even today, is an epic figure. But was he real? There was a time when this question was widely debated. Many scholars were convinced that David was a work of fiction and that the Hebrew Bible was useless as a historical source. In 1992, one popular scientist summarized the view of many scholars and Bible skeptics when he published a book in which he wrote, "Whoever is living in the Palestinian highlands around 1000 BCE, that's the time of David and Solomon, they do not think, look, or act like the people the biblical writers have put there. They are literary creations." Unfortunately for him, this scorching denunciation of David and the Bible was poorly timed. This is because 6 months after his book was published, the House of David inscription was found. The discovery of the Tel Dan Stele was an earthquake in the world of biblical archaeology and Bible scholarship. The conversation about Israel's greatest king suddenly and dramatically changed. Scholars could no longer claim King David or the kingdom of Israel or the house of David was a work of fiction, a literary creation. From now on, the conversation and debate would revolve around the nature, that's the size, the power and influence, the regional importance of Israel under King David and his descendants. Was the kingdom David and Solomon established truly as illustrious and monumental as the Bible describes? This question is at the center of the Kingdom of David and Solomon Discovered exhibit. And the House of David inscription is the key, archaeologically, that unlocks the answer. This is why it is so important, and this is why it completes our Kingdom of David and Solomon Discovered exhibit. Before I introduce the next two speakers, we would like to just extend our heartfelt gratitude to some friends and organizations in Israel without whom this moment would not be possible. First, we're grateful to the state of Israel and to the wonderful people of Israel. We understand that this is your most important archaeological find, that it's the only object inscribed with the name of your greatest king, and that it powerfully attests to your 3,000-year connection to Jerusalem and to Judea and Samaria. And we will, I promise, guard it with our lives. We're thankful to the Israel Antiquities Authority, to its director, Ali Escondido, and especially to Dr. Orit Shamar, head of international exhibitions at the IAA. Bringing the Tel Dan Stele to America was a long and somewhat precarious journey, and we simply couldn't have navigated it without Orit's wisdom and advice. We are also incredibly grateful to the Israel Museum of Jerusalem, which is one of the finest museums in Israel, and if you ever visit Israel, you have to visit the Israel Museum. We're especially thankful to Dr. Chaim Gittler, Chief Curator of Archaeology at the museum, and we're thankful to our friend Pirchia, who we will hear from here in a moment. The House of David inscription is Pirchia's baby, and we're grateful for the opportunity to babysit it for a couple of months. Right now, we're going to hear from two distinguished individuals, and their speeches will be separated by a musical interlude. The Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, and even this magnificent building, is named after the late Herbert W. Armstrong, the popular author, educator, and humanitarian, and a very warm and close friend of Israel and its archaeology. When Mr. Armstrong died in 1986, Gerald Flurry picked up his mantle. Today, Mr. Flurry continues Mr. Armstrong's work and legacy in Jerusalem and in Israel. Mr. Flurry has been a student of the Hebrew Bible and biblical history for more than 60 years. He has authored more than 80 books on biblical figures and biblical history and prophecy. He has written a book on almost every great biblical personality. But of all the personalities he has researched and studied, King David has really stood out as the most studied and perhaps his favorite. In fact, Mr. Flurry's latest book, which is on the Psalms of David, was published just last month. The second speech today is going to be delivered by Mr. Flurry's son, who has been by his father's side for the past 30 years. He is the director of the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. He's the executive editor of Let the Stones Speak. He's also the host of the Trumpet Daily radio podcast and radio program. This man, like his father, loves Jerusalem and loves Israel. He's been there more than 20 times. He's volunteered on archaeological excavations. He's visited sites all across Israel, recording television and radio programs. And for more than 20 years, he was a close friend and confidant of Dr. Eilat Mazar. The second speech in this segment will be delivered by Mr. Stephen Flurry. Right now, it's my pleasure to introduce a lady without whom this exhibit, and certainly the loan of the Tel Dan Stele, would not have been possible. She is an archaeologist by profession. She has excavated sites all across Israel. She's an expert in Persian period archaeology. And today she is the curator of Iron Age and Persian period archaeology at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. But as impressive as this career is, this isn't even her greatest accomplishment. She's the mother of 4 boys, and she's the wife of a soldier who serves, even now, in Israel's ongoing war. Please join me in welcoming from the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, Pirchia Eyall.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Stephen Flurry, Director of the Armstrong Institution, Culture Founder, and Honor Guest. I'm glad to be here today at the Tel Dan Stele grand opening in the exhibit, The Kingdom of David and Solomon Discovered, at the Armstrong Institution Culture Foundation. And I'm proud to be the representative of the Israel Museum, Jerusalem, as a creator in the Iron Age and Persian period department in the Archaeology wing. During the 8th century BC, the land of Israel went through many political epochs. The United Monarchy, which according to the Bible stand exist during the 8th century, was divided into 2 kingdoms, Israel and Judea. In addition, other small kingdoms arose in the Transjordan, Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Also, from the north, the Aramic tribes organized themselves into political framework, and the kingdom of Aram Damascus took central place. But above all of them was the shadow of the Assyrian Empire, which once again left Mesopotamia in another attempt to conquer the entire region. What is described in this period can be read and learned from the Bible, but there are also some extra Bible archaeology and historical sources that tell us about what happens. In this period, we find, for the first time in the land of Israel region, royal inscription telling about campaigns and victories. It's possible that those stela were inspired by the Assyrian stela, which Assyrian kingdom placed wherever they fought, conquered, and won. The first stela was type known to the modern research is the Meisha stela of the king of Moab, which was discovered at the end of the 19th century in Transjordan and Dibon, the biblical Dibon, about 30 kilometers east of En-Gedi. The inscription discovered the victory of Meisha, king of Moab, over the kingdom of Israel, and currently displayed in the Louvre Museum in France. The discovery of the stela and the interpretation of the text are considered a change in the scientists' approach to the biblical. This is the first extra biblical evidence discovered, a story that appears in the Bible. In addition, the Meisha stela contains extra names from the period, which are also mentioned in the Bible. But a century passed until a discovery of another royal stela, which, after its publication and research of the inscription engraved on it, became one of the most important archaeology discoveries of the land of Israel. It all began on the morning of the 21st of July in the year 1993, where Gila Cook, the measurer of the Tel Dan exhibition, were walking in the city gate area. Suddenly, she noticed that letters were engraved on one of the stones in the wall discovered near the city gate. After removing the stone from the wall, it became clear that this stone is part of a stela bearing an inscription. But the story didn't end here. A year later on, 2 more parts of the stela were discovered, combined into the floor of the plaza gate. Supposedly, the 2 parts connect and complete the missing details in the inscription. The language of the inscription are Aramaic, and it is engraved in alphabetic script on a large stone that was specially smooth for writing. In the fragment of the stone that was survived, only 13 lines were preserved, and between each word separate dot. The intention of the immediately catch be a row number 9 in the right fragment. This, even before they describe the 2 other parts. The word Beit David, House of David, was completely clear, and their meaning is clear. This is the first time that the name House of David is mentioned in any source outside of the Bible, and for many scholars, this mention is used to prove the existence of David as a historical figure. This proved based on the fact that in the ancient times, it was customary to describe the kings according to the head of their royal line, as indicated in this inscription. After finding the 2 other fragments, the essence of the inscription also became clear. The inscription is part of Aramaic victory moment that was placed by one of the kings of Aram following a victory over the kingdom of Israel. The inscription mentions Yoram, son of Achav, king of Israel, and Hazael, son of Yoram, king of Judah, referred into the inscription as King, the House of David. According to the Book of Kings, those kings killed by Yehu, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Due to the mention of the kings, it is common to assume that the king where honor inscription written was Hazael, the king of around Damascus, whose region coincided with the Yoram and Hazael. The connection of the inscription to Yehoram revolution is due, among other things, to the fact that this is the only case, according to the Bible, that the king Israel and the king Judah died in the same year. Since the inscription also described the deaths of those 2 kings, despite a long gap in the terms of historical discussion, many scholars believe that those are described that relate to the same event. So how can we connect the Bible to revolve? The 2 descriptions, the 2 direction of solving are rejected to the one of the source as unreviewable. The non-traditional research may describe correctly of the biblical story and claim this is only a proper story. And the traditional scholar will describe the credibility of the inscription and see as empty boast, which is often found in the inscription of the kings of ancient times. And perhaps it's possible that we should try to combine the 2 sources and restore them, both the Bible story and the events in the time. And perhaps, we don't really know, there is evidence here to a revolution thrown to the Middle East, in which Hazael and Yehu compared to change the dynasty of their rulers, each of his own reasons. Or was Yehu a vassal of King of Aram, and the king boasted in his action, not his? The end of the stela was evident, and it was broken even in the ancient time, and the fragments of it were discovered in a secondary use. According to the location of the fragment inside the wall and the part of the floor of the plaza gate, it appeared that the stela was broken already in the beginning of the 8th century BC, probably by Joash, the region that began at the 8th century BC, and whom is written in the Bible that he returned the cities that Hazael, king of Aram, conquered. Joash apparently objected to the existence of this inscription, telling that Israel fought battle, and therefore ordered it to be turned down. As mentioned, the main importance of the inscription is the archaeology research that is the inscription mentioned the House of David. The inscription is the only accepted and reliable archaeology evidence dating to the first temple period in which the House of David is mentioned. After spared of minimalistic soul in the biblical study, many scholars questioned the existence of the United Monarchy. There were even some scholars who questioned the historical existence of David and Solomon. But the discovery of the Stele stela, which dated to the same stage after the middle of the 8th century, contemplated to be the fact that almost all scholars today see David as a history figurine and as the one who founded the destiny that rules Judah. I would like to express the gratitude to Brad Macdonald, creator of the exhibit. Thanks to his president, we are all able to bring to the exhibit the Stele stela from the Israel Museum permanent display in order to enrich the exhibit. Many thanks to Brad, Brent, and the entire Institute staff who did everything to help with many requests related to the stela before I got here and during my stay here. Susan Landau, director of the Israel Museum Jerusalem, and Dr. Chaim Hitler, chief creator of the Archaeology Wing, also expressed their gratitude to the jointed project and look forward to future projects we will create together. Thank you very much. Toda rabah.
Greetings, everyone, and as we heard earlier, a special welcome to all of our friends in Israel who are watching online. My father was hoping to address everyone today, but yesterday he wasn't feeling so well, so he too is at home watching online. At an event celebrating King David, I can't help but to think about the late Dr. Eyall Mazar, and even her grandfather. I forget what year it was when he died, back in the 80s, I believe. Professor Benjamin Mazar, and all of the important archaeology that the Mazar family has done revolving around the First Temple period, and especially King David. As I think back on our working relationship with Dr. Mazar, Eyall Mazar, David really was the connecting point. We read a story about King David's palace. That was back in 2006, and it got our attention. My colleague and I flew to Israel. We met Dr. Mazar before the second excavation she was to have at the city of David, and that began a 20-year relationship, almost anyway, 18 I guess to be precise. And we were at City of David for some of those years. We were at the Ophel, just north of the City of David, and as we started to study more about Dr. Mazar's work, so much of it did revolve around King David. She had this unforgettable headline back in 1997 where she, looking into the Bible, knew in her mind where King David's palace would have been situated. And so she had a beautiful picture with her article of the city of David, and then this bright red arrow that said, "It's right there. That's where King David's palace is." And she wasn't able to start digging there for another 8 years, I think it was, because she didn't have the funding. So she was very passionate. She used the Bible as her guide, and once she started digging, she found all kinds of things regarding the First Temple period and David in particular. If she were still with us today, she would be very, very proud right now. She was not one to travel outside of Israel. She loved Israel, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that if she was still with us, she would have made the trip to Oklahoma finally. We would have twisted her arm, something fierce. As I say, we first began our work in Jerusalem in 2006, helping at the City of David. Since then, we've worked alongside Eyall and her team on many, many digs over the years, including her final dig in 2018 on the Ophel. And our archaeology work on the Ophel continues. Just today, in fact, we completed the final day of excavation on the latest stage of the Ophel excavation alongside Professor Liebner of Hebrew University. And over the years, we've been privileged to have participated in the discovery of some really astonishing finds: the large stone structure that is King David's palace, the monumental walls of King Solomon's Jerusalem, the Hezekiah bulla, the Isaiah bulla. We've had those on display in past exhibits. The bullae of the two Judean princes mentioned in Jeremiah 36. We've excavated the wall of Nehemiah, and of course we also have participated in the one that turned up the 70 AD destruction coins and that golden menorah. We've featured all of that on our website, thetrumpet.com, and our Trumpet magazine. And here we are today, exhibiting the greatest artifact in the world related to King David. It really is hard to believe. I visited the Tel Dan site. It's about 100 miles north of Jerusalem. We saw it back in 2011. That's where they discovered the stele. And of course, it's been on display at the Israel Museum. It's only been outside of the country of Israel once, as Brad Macdonald was mentioning. But it really and truly is hard to believe that it's here in Oklahoma, of all places. Everyone that's familiar with archaeological excavations and artifacts they keep saying, how in the world did you get that to Oklahoma? So it's here, and as Mr. Macdonald said, it really does complete our exhibit out in the lobby. I knew, as I say, I knew Dr. Mazar very well. We spent many hours talking and writing emails, sharing theories, and as I say, so much of it did revolve around the Davidic dynasty. One of Dr. Mazar's most famous phrases was, "Let the stones speak." I heard her say this dozens of times. I think it appears in most articles about her work. As she said, that's basically the gist of that red arrow in 1997. Hey, let's put the theory to the test and start digging, and we'll let the stones speak and test my theory and see if it's right. And she was right. We love that phrase. In fact, we have used that phrase. That's what we titled our magazine on archaeology, Let the Stones Speak. It's also the name of our podcast. And so here we are with perhaps the most important stone in the world regarding, the message that it has, the house of David. King David was real. The kingdom of Israel was real. The dynasty of David was real. And what does all of this mean? It means that the biblical text is real and authentic. We can trust the Bible as a historical source, among other things. As I say, Dr. Mazar used it to guide her in her work. And she was not a religious woman in so many ways. This is from a 2002 book called The Bible Unearthed. It's by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman. And I think both of them would be considered somewhat skeptical of some of the biblical record. But regarding the Tel Dan Stele, they said this is dramatic evidence of the fame of the Davidic dynasty less than 100 years after the reign of David's son Solomon. The fact that Judah, or perhaps its capital Jerusalem, is referred to with only a mention of its ruling house is clear evidence that the reputation of David was not a literary invention of a much later period. They write, the house of David was known throughout the region. This clearly validates the biblical description of a figure named David becoming the founder of the dynasty of Judahite kings in Jerusalem. We're grateful for the House of David inscription, as it really does complete our exhibit, an exhibit which reveals a story and history that has never been more important. As we gather here today, the state of Israel is engaged in war with terrorists in Gaza, now Lebanon, who want nothing less than to vanquish the Jewish state and the Jewish people. Tragically, these evil forces receive sympathy and support from too many people in the West. Many today fail to understand Israel's history, its connection to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and its central role in Western civilization. This is why this exhibit and the House of David inscription is so crucial and so timely. Never has it been more important that we understand Israel's history, its deep connection to Jerusalem, to Judea, Samaria, to King David, and the House of David. When you understand and appreciate this history, you understand why Israel must fight to defend itself, and not just itself, also the Bible and even Western civilization. Dr. Mazar understood this well. She said, if you don't understand our history, you won't be willing and prepared to defend the nation, our people, and culture. This history unites our people. The Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology is proud to exhibit the beautiful history of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. The House of David inscription will help us do this more effectively. We look forward to many future projects in Jerusalem and Israel, and will remain fervent in our support and love for Israel and her brave people. Thank you.
I was glad when they said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord." Our feet shall stand within your gates, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem restored, one united whole. Here the tribes assemble to praise and thank the Lord. Jerusalem our own, here are set the thrones of the house of David. Here the seeds of peace are sown. Jerusalem, for your peace we pray, that tranquility enters your doors. Our feet now stand within your gates, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem restored, one united whole. Here the tribes assemble to praise and thank the Lord. Jerusalem renowned, from David's house above, the thrones of justice, here in this beloved town. Peace be within your walls. Peace be in your palace halls. May those who love you ever be blessed, and in the house of God find rest.
We've had some beautiful music performances this afternoon. We have one more after our keynote speaker. And you know what's remarkable? The lyrics to every piece of music that we are listening to today, except for Hatikvah, Israel's national anthem, they were written 3,000 years ago by King David. Is there another artist in human history with that sort of longevity? Most of us, I'm sure, have heard of our final speaker. He is a best-selling author, a brilliant documentary filmmaker, and the host of a very popular podcast. He's also a great patriot. He loves America and its traditions and history, its Judeo-Christian heritage, and its profound connections to Jerusalem and biblical history. He was born and raised in India. He came to America as an international exchange student. He attended Dartmouth, where he graduated with highest honors. After college, he worked in the White House, advising policy for President Ronald Reagan. After that, he worked at the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Hoover Institution, some of the top conservative think tanks in America. He has written 20 books, many of them bestsellers, on themes like crime, faith, racial prejudice, political correctness, illiberal education, American exceptionalism, socialism, ideology, freedom, and much more. Through his books and films, and now his highly rated podcast, he has helped millions understand what makes America exceptional and to love this country. More recently in his career, he has written, directed, produced, and appeared in 8 films. His latest film, and the trailer looks awesome, by the way, I watched it this morning. His latest film is called Vindicating Trump, and it opens in theaters this Friday. Finally, he's a staunch friend and supporter of the State of Israel. He understands that Israel, and especially Jerusalem, the home of the biblical kings and prophets and the birthplace of Judaism and Christianity, is pivotal to the identity of Western civilization. On his podcast, he has explored Israel's biblical archaeology and shown how it confirms the Jews' long history with Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. Please help me welcome Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted and honored to be back. I was here just a few months ago, my first visit, and I didn't expect to be back so soon. In fact, I was just gearing up for my promotional tour on the new film. Earlier today, I was on the Trumpet Daily podcast. I was thinking, I'm on the Trumpet Daily podcast, and what am I doing but I'm trumpeting Trump. Pretty interesting. I feel utterly unqualified to be giving this keynote address. My own work on Israeli archaeology is woefully incomplete, to put it mildly. And I want to approach this marvelous artifact, this marvelous stele, from a somewhat different angle or point of view. To me, you have in front of us here in Oklahoma, and that itself is something of a miracle. Debbie and I just watched the movie Twisters. And well, first of all, it's obviously an attack on the state of Oklahoma, because it appears that nothing happens here except twisters, one after the other. In fact, as I was walking up here, I couldn't resist the image of the Tel Dan stele being sucked up in a twister. And I thought, you better make sure this stone is like bolted down. That would not be, you'd have a lot of explaining to do to the Israeli Antiquities Authority. Let the stone speak, but what is this particular stone saying? What is the message of the stone? Well, to me, to put it in almost crude terms, it is kind of God's Leroy was here. I think you know what I mean. When you go visit a place, you have people go, Debbie was here. You just kind of scrawl that out there, hoping that maybe someday someone will see it. The figure of David has been considered over many centuries, even by skeptics, a kind of marvelous literary creation, an incredible dramatic story, the ultimate story of the underdog, that's David against Goliath. and then the astounding story of David and Bathsheba, which I think establishes David not just as an adulterer, but a horrific criminal who sends an innocent man to his death for no other reason other than the fact that he has designs on the man's wife. How can a figure so dubious, so suspect, be one of the great heroes of the Bible and one of the great heroes of Western civilization? It's important to note here that we're not talking merely about the history of ancient Israel or even Israel generally. We're talking about our history. Why? Because when the American founders crossed the pond, when they came here to America, and when their forefathers did, they brought with them Athens, and they brought with them Jerusalem. They brought with them the legacy of David. They brought with them the teachings of the Bible. And in the story of David, you have this climactic scene where the prophet Nathan approaches the king on his throne and tells him a story about a rich man who had many lambs and was planning a great banquet, but instead of using one of his lambs or several of his lambs, he goes to the poor man and takes his lamb. And the Bible tells us that David's anger burned, and David basically says, this man deserves to be severely punished, if not killed. And then the prophet Nathan points to David and goes, you are that man. And I think that the remarkable thing about this is, and this explains David in a nutshell, as they say, David's reaction. The normal reaction would be, execute that man. Get him out of here. But for David, that's not his reaction. David's reaction is, I have sinned before God. And so it is the repentance of David, the humility of David, that, in a sense, is morally etched on the Western soul through the centuries. And yet, it appeared until relatively recently that David was, in fact, a kind of story. These people can't be real. Was Job real? Was there really a place where a guy named Job lived? Could these figures in the Hebrew scriptures, from Isaiah to Jeremiah, could they be real? And even if they were real, how would we know? They're lost in the mist of time. What possible record could be left that would attest to the actuality, which is to say the historicity of these figures? They seem to be lost in time. And in a sense, you may say that the entire system of beliefs of the West, the idea of Jerusalem, which of course is an idea that is embraced not just by the Jews, but also by Christianity, Jerusalem appears to be entirely in the province of faith or revelation, while Athens appears to be squarely in the province of reason. And that's kind of the way most people have understood it. Athens reflects the critical mind. It's the place of Socrates. It is the birthplace of philosophy. That's where we use our brains. Jerusalem is essentially the antithesis of that. Jerusalem is God says so. Jerusalem is take it on faith. Jerusalem is faith is somehow better than reason. And this has created, in some sense, the bifurcation of the Western mind. Much of the attack on Jerusalem today comes in the name of Athens. You could almost say that the Enlightenment, in a nutshell, is mobilizing the spirit of Athens against the spirit of Jerusalem. Reason reigns supreme. You can't believe the Bible. How can you trust all that stuff? It doesn't make any sense. And yet, it seems that in this secular age that we're living in, this age of skepticism, of disbelief, but not just disbelief, that would be one thing. It is also the age of the utter flouting and rejection of the moral code that comes out of Jerusalem. Look at the Old Testament, and I'm sure if you lived in America 50 years ago, let's just say 1953, you walked around the country, you talked to people, and you said, do you agree that the Ten Commandments is a really good way to live? If everybody lived by the Ten Commandments, would America be a better society, yes or no? I think you'd find that 99% of Americans, whether Christian or Jewish or nothing at all, would go, yeah, sure, of course, obviously. And that's the point, is that while Western civilization was built, was incubated, was developed in a horizon in which the belief of God and the belief in an external moral code was obvious, we are living at a time when it is not only not obvious, but we are living in a time when there is a multi-dimensional attack on not just the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but also the moral code that was, in a sense, given by that God through Moses and in other forms, through the commandments. This is all under siege. And it's under siege from people who say things like, well, gee, I don't know, Dinesh, I mean, you got a sacred book. Everybody's got a sacred book. The Hindus have sacred books, the Bhagavad Gita. The ancient Greeks believed in all kinds of, well, we call it Greek mythology. Do you really believe there was a Mount Olympus? You really believe that that stuff was real? You really believe that there was an Achilles and there was the human beings interacted with the gods? That's made up stuff. So if you have a holy book and they have a holy book, how do you know your holy book is real? I think it is in this context that we should think about biblical archaeology. Biblical archaeology is almost as if God has decided in this most secular time in the world to start speaking back. And he's doing it through the stones. So the stones actually aren't speaking. Stones can't speak. God is speaking through the stones. And what God is saying, it seems, is that I'm going to take some of the most iconic moments in this astounding Hebrew scriptures, and I'm going to show you that they're real. Now, we already had other intimations, because the Bible makes astounding claims that on the face of it appear to be not only unverifiable, but somewhat ridiculous. Even David. There was a huge, a powerful dynasty in Israel that dominated the region. Wait, what? What about the Egyptians? What about the Babylonians? What about the Assyrians? What about the Hittites? I mean, we know that there were these massive, powerful empires. Are you telling me that little Israel sort of whipped them all and became the greatest of them all? What? Well, as it turns out, and as we learn now, and only now, those dynasties had almost mysteriously subsided around the period of Solomon and Saul and David. And there was a period in which all those dynasties, oddly enough, different as they were, seemed to be kind of flat on their back. And you had a period of Israeli or Israelite ascendancy. And then that period of ascendancy was over, and those dynasties experienced a revival. This is not a matter of faith. This is actually now a matter of fact. And the Bible tells us all these things from the first line of the Old Testament, as we say. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means, and the further insinuation that God did this out of nothing. Now, right there, you have something that contradicts what the ancient Greeks believed. The ancient Greeks believed that out of nothing can only come nothing. And therefore, in ancient Greece, the belief was God has to be some sort of a divine craftsman who takes existing materials that must have been there forever and then carpenter style remakes them into the world that we have now. But the idea that you could make something out of nothing, well, that's crazy. And yet that is asserted as a fact in the Bible, and it's asserted by a group of Hebrew writers who have not conducted any experiments and not done even really any philosophical speculations, but essentially have said, God told me. God told me. And yet, if we fast forward to now, to the most recent discoveries of modern physics and cosmology, we learn, in fact, you learn in a physics classroom in any decent university in the first 3 weeks, that first there was nothing, and then there was a universe. That in fact the biblical account is supported by the latest knowledge of modern physics and cosmology. And then the Bible talks about this remarkable group of people, the Jews. And the Bible says categorically, well, first of all, it says categorically that these are the people of God. God chose them. Now, it's why God chose them, I think, is just as big a mystery in Israel as it is to us. Why them? The writer Hilaire Belloc many years ago composed a poem that went like this: how odd of God to choose the Jews. That's the poem. And it's not because of the supreme virtues of Abraham or the spotless moral life of David. It appears that God chose the Jews to represent something in the world. To represent, if you will, God's laws. God's preferred way of life for man. And very interestingly, the Bible says that this people, scattered, will return to their ancestral homeland. Now you have to really just look at history to see what an implausible prophecy that is. Prophecies, by the way, are valid in direct proportion to their implausibility. What I mean by that is that if I say something, hey, I'm going to toss a coin, and guess what? It's going to come out heads. Well, yeah, that's interesting, but I got a 1 in 2 chance of that happening. If I say I'm going to spin a roulette wheel that has numbers 1 to 100 and you're going to get number 89, that's a somewhat more impressive prophecy because the chances of that happening are pretty low. When you consider the Jews dispersed since around 70 AD, scattered to the far winds of the earth, the idea that they would not just come back and reunite, but reunite exactly in the place where they started, what's the chance of that? So this is a people that have very much in the spirit of biblical prophecy persisted. And perhaps the most astounding thing for me, Debbie and I visited Israel for the first time. My wife Debbie is here, by the way. Honey, you want to stand up and just be acknowledged? We must confess that we've been lots of places, but Israel had a very peculiar and dramatic impact on us for a number of reasons. I mean, part of it, I suppose, is that these are days when you travel, much of the world is beginning to look the same, right? I mean, you go these days to Oslo or Copenhagen. Well, I mean, you might as well be in Milwaukee. I mean, sure, you have some guys in suits riding a bicycle, or every third guy's named Sven, but But aside from that, the stores, the ambiance is the same. Not in Israel. Right away you know that you are in a modern society, but one that remains anchored in the old world. And the world of the Bible is visible in Israel now. I think the thing that struck us, even more than that, was that you have archaeologists in Israel, and we met some of them, who in the spirit of Dr. Eyall Mazar, they tell us we approach archaeology with the Bible in the left hand and our tools in the right hand. So if we're looking, let's say, for Sodom and Gomorrah, we don't just go start digging. We read the Bible, and it gives you clues about what Abraham saw and where the mountain was and where the smoke came from. And we apply those clues, and we go look there. And we see what we find. And I want to emphasize that this is not some kind of theological hocus pocus. This is actually very sound archaeology. In fact, it's a very sound way to go about finding things out in general. Let's say you were trying to figure out whether the Trojan War really happened. How would you do that? Let's say you're trying to find out not only whether it happened, but where it happened. Well, you'd obviously pick up Homer's Iliad in one hand and Homer's Odyssey in the other, and you'd look for clues. There are these two whirlpools, there's Scylla and Charybdis. Okay, well, let's go and look and see where that kind of current can be found, where ships can be lost if they go left or if they go right. In other words, you would use the text to make predictions, and then you would go search to see if those predictions prove to be corroborated. That's exactly what Dr. Mazar is doing. And again, that is not biblical speculation. That is, in fact, using an ancient text as a clue or marker to then go and look and dig for artifacts. And so this concept of biblical archaeology is very astounding and not something that we actually, certainly I didn't, know a lot about. And I feel silly saying this because I spent several years around between 2008 and 12 debating a lot of the world's leading atheists on universities around America and sometimes abroad. People like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, the philosopher Daniel Dennett. And we would debate cosmology and physics and history, but somehow of the field of biblical archaeology, I knew nothing. Nothing. And yet I think that is the field that is going to make the difference in the years ahead, because as people all over the world with a secular mindset are able either directly go see the Tel Dan Stele or through media. One of the things that I want to do, Debbie and I want to do, is make a film that encompasses these themes so people who don't see, people who aren't lucky enough to be here, who aren't lucky enough to go to Israel, can see for themselves the way in which God is speaking back through the stones. And I'll conclude by emphasizing that for me, this is a story that is not just about the past, and it's not even just about the present. It is about the deep linkage between the past and the present, the ancient past and the present and the future. Why? Because if one looks around the world, it doesn't take a great deal of sort of strategic genius to recognize that the conflicts of 3,000 years ago are in only a slightly modified form back with us now. What? How can that even be possible? Well, here is Israel, circa 1000 BC, and it's surrounded by hostile enemies. And Israel is the Israelites are the people of God, and you have to say that the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Moabites and the Philistines, they're the enemies of God, at least in that context. And so there is a cosmic battle that is an actual battle, but it's a battle that reverberates with, you may say, cosmic significance, because it involves good and evil in the widest scale. And then we fast forward to now, and what do we see? The same people, the Israelites, the Jews, in the same place, surrounded by hostile enemies, enemies dedicated to wiping Israel off the map. And there's even a kind of peculiar particularity to this. Who are the Palestinians? Where do we get that name? Well, the name Palestinian is derived from the word Philistine. And just as the Philistines were an ancient enemy of Israel, in some way you could argue, I'm not saying in the identical form, because obviously we've had the intervention of Islam. The enemies of ancient Israel were, in some sense, you could say, pagans, worshippers of idols. Now we have an enemy, radical Islam, that oddly enough is within the Abramite tradition. Radical Islam claims to be the final revelation of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And we have a new conflict going on now. And all of this completes the Bible. In other words, the Bible remarkably combines a discussion from the very beginning. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. You couldn't start before that. In fact, that's a passage that's long puzzled me. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Who's talking? It can't be God, because it doesn't say in the beginning, I made the heavens and the earth. Evidently, somebody else was there. But who? So, from the beginning, the Bible draws us in with mystery. And yet, as I said, you have the remote past connected to the biblical present, and then the role of the prophet, the Israelite prophets, is to make critiques of the present as a way of pointing to the future. And so there's a beautiful completeness to the Bible. And the only question we have is, will that completeness be somehow reflected in the actual history of the world as it plays out? Because the history of the world is still going on. We don't know the end. That's a story that hasn't ended. And by ended, I mean achieved the completion of the story. But there are hints about it in the Hebrew scriptures. And so for me, all of this is a way of illuminating not just the ancient past. There was this great King David. He's a moral exemplar. We can learn a lot from him. But also, how does this cosmic drama play out in our own lives? And how does it play out in the actual history that is unfolding before our eyes? I want to commend and congratulate you for somehow, you Oklahomans are known for your shifty bargaining techniques. How you convinced the Israelis to part with this priceless artifact and bring it here. How you staged it so all the other bidders were out of the room, or actually their planes landed at the wrong airport. I don't know, but you did it. I commend you for doing it. This is the place to be. Debbie and I are delighted to be here, and thank you for having me be part of this marvelous exhibit and this wonderful exhibition. Thank you very much.